Brewing Inc. is now syndicated on SeriousWriter.com. See them at SeriousWriter.com for resources, articles, videos, topical classes, and now a podcast, the Brewing Inc. podcast, because we're syndicated on SeriousWriter.com.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of Interbrews. I'm here with Catherine Jones Payne. Am I saying that right?
Yes. That's
yes.
Right. There aren't too many ways to say that name.
Well, you never know. And so, Catherine, I've seen a couple times at Realm Makers. I'm sure she was there long before I was. I've been the past couple of years. How many years have you been to Realm Makers?
Oh, I think 4 now, since 2015. So yeah, four times. 2015.
And so Catherine and I also have the same agent, Kyle Young. And as I was looking at some interviews to do and trying to give people, value with some of the interviews was different topics and the authors and different things, I thought Catherine would be a great choice because of some of her expertise. She's not only an author, but as we'll get into, she's an editor as well. So how are you doing today, Catherine?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no problem. I'm excited about it because for an author and a writer, their favorite thing is editing, right?
Always. That's everybody's favorite.
That's the favorite part. So, but before we get into that, why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about you? Maybe start with what's the one most important thing people should know about you or something like that. I don't know. And talk about yourself for just a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an author and editor. I've been editing for I think 6 or 7 years now. I don't want to calculate that too much because then that will tell me how old I'm getting. And then my first book came out last year in 2017. I write about mermaids, murder, and mayhem, and I joke that that's all of my favorite things. And when I'm selling books in person, that usually makes people give me the side eye and sort of move away, or they laugh, and then I know that they're the right kind of people for my book. And that series is almost complete. Last book in that series is coming out in December.
Nice. And so whereabouts do you live? You're on the East Coast somewhere, right?
Yes, Greenville, South Carolina area now. We just moved there a few months ago.
I thought it was South Carolina. I've been interviewing a lot of people recently, so I'm like, I thought it was South Carolina. So, and so how long have you been writing in general? Let's start there. I know you got your first book last year, and you got this series, and it's been going really well, I think. It seems like it has. So when did you start writing?
Yeah, well, I've been writing forever. One of my earliest memories, I think I must have been 6 at the time, is climbing up into like my parents' old red computer chair and logging on to this old DOS machine and typing out a story of kidnapped princesses. And I was very into this story. I was probably wearing a tiara and princess slippers as I wrote it too.
Right.
And so writing's always been something that I wanted to do. It was my pretty constant answer to the question of what do you want to be when you grow up? And so yeah, I'd done it on and off, and then really decided to take it seriously and get the books out in 2016, and then released Breakwater in 2017.
So, but you were editing before that, correct?
Yes. Yes. I've been editing since I was in college. Started doing that to buy shampoo, and ended up building it into a business. And it's something that has really been a joy to do. I know a lot of writers who also do editing are doing the editing kind of as a gig until they make it big and can just do writing. But I don't think editing is something I ever want to give up in its entirety. I really enjoy helping shape a manuscript, partnering with authors in that way. It's a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. And so what made you want to get into editing first? So obviously you always love to read, you love stories, you love making your own stories. So tell me how that process started when you said in college, was it like your friends' papers and stuff?
Yes, well, definitely did some of that, as far as, pointing out the grammar errors, teaching some of my friends how to do some writing things that they just weren't sure about. I was an English major in college, so editing was, I think, always something that was a little bit on my radar. At least as an adult. When I was a little kid, I was horrified that editors even existed because I did not want anyone interfering with my creative process. But as an adult, editing was always on my radar. And so I started out not even editing novels. I was doing editing for, corporations, entrepreneurs, that sort of thing right at first, and got into editing books fairly gradually. But that's really been where my passion is and where the center of my business has taken off.
Nice. And give everybody the name of your business real quick.
Yes, so Quill Pen Editorial Services. I'm the executive editor for Quill Pen, and then I have some employee and contract editors working under me as well.
Yeah, and so, but you guys do like the whole gamut of editing, like line editing and then kind of content, kind of that sort of thing?
Yes. Yeah, we partner with writers at any stage of the process, all the way from coaching writers through their first draft, if they need help with that, through developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, all the way through the final proofread. Whatever someone's editing needs are, we're happy to partner with them to make sure those needs are met.
That's so cool. And just so everybody knows, I don't know, maybe she, gives people money under the table or something, but they rave about you every year at Realm Makers that I'm there. They're like, oh, you should totally use her and her company, and they're so great and totally made my book better, and everybody just raves about you. So, but you don't get your pens there or something. What was the thing?
Oh, so this is a long running joke at Realm Makers. So I think in 2016, my second year there, I was bringing a bunch of Quill Pen branded pens to Realm Makers as giveaways, and on the airplane on the way there, what was it that happened the first year? Okay, so the first year it was the great shampoo fiasco. So and I double bagged the shampoo twice, I will have you know. I guess I double bagged it once. I bagged it twice. And still the shampoo leaked out of the bottle and through the first bag and through the second bag and into the suitcase where my suit jacket and all of the pens were and all that sort of thing. So like clothes you can just wash, it's fine. But shampoo really gets inside pens and is hard to and we had like 500 of these. So literally me, Stephanie, my managing editor, and a client who was there at the conference with us were like in a hotel room trying to hand wash the shampoo out of these pens. And I think we got most of them, but some of them were still bubbling when you clicked them because they were those pens that you click the end to get them in and out. And so I told that story at the awards banquet at Realm Makers that year, much to everyone's delight. And then the second year, the year after that, everyone was asking me, oh, how did the pens fare getting to Realm Makers this year? And I had to tell them that this year my coconut oil had leaked out of its bottle and through one bag and through another bag and gotten all over another bunch of pens. So I didn't bring pens to Realm Makers this year.
The first year you could have made it like part of the gig. Like you could have made it part of one of the features of the pen, like with special magic bubbles. Special magic bubbles, right? And it goes right along. So, yeah, I think that's really fun. So let's start with when a writer comes to you, what are some of the things that you really enjoy in the editing process? So say a writer comes to you, they've got a manuscript. What are some things that you like to do when you start to work with an author like that?
Yeah, so my passion in editing is developmental editing. I love working with writers at that stage of the process where they have a completed draft, preferably a second or third draft. And they're still looking for the big picture ways that they want to make it better. So I love talking plot structure and character development, especially character development, pacing, those sorts of things, where we're really getting down to the bones of the novel and helping the writer figure out how we can take their central vision, take what they're doing in that novel, and communicate that more clearly to the audience. So we're not changing anything about the most central part of the author's story or the author's vision, but we're just helping them communicate that a little more efficiently to their ideal reader.
And using myself as an example, when I was starting, a few years ago, and my question to friends who had self-published continued at first was, do I really need an editor? Because there was this thing, and I was looking at pricing and all that stuff. And when you look at your budget, you think, maybe I can do this myself. So what are some of the benefits of having an editor? All kinds. I know there's line editing and there's all that stuff, but especially developmental editing and those sort of things. What are some of the benefits or the needs that go into editing?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I tell all writers starting out that they really should hire a developmental editor, at least for their first couple of books. I've been editing for years, but I still have a developmental editor look over my books, give me that feedback. I change a lot of things in response to that feedback. And that's something that I'm going to continue to do in the future. With my books, I've had editors catch that with the way I'd written scenes, I had inadvertently sent a mermaid out topless into the street, essentially, or that a mermaid had suddenly sprouted legs, or just lots of little mistakes that you're not necessarily going to catch as you're writing. And it's hard for someone to edit their own work. I had read over a manuscript. I'd read over this manuscript several times, and I didn't catch that the character had undressed and then not dressed before heading straight back up. Because we're so used, or what's the word I'm looking for? When we imagine a scene, our brains imagine the whole scene, and we don't. Since our brain has already visualized that scene so thoroughly, it can be really hard to then note all of the ways where that has not 100% translated to the page. So getting that second pair of eyes is really important. If budget really is a consideration, because developmental editing can be expensive, working with a lot of alpha or beta readers can be helpful. Having a really good critique group, there are ways that you can cut down costs. And you certainly should work with a critique group or beta readers before you send the book to the editor, so that an editor can really dig deep into it and isn't just looking for those silly surface level mistakes that we all make. But if it's at all feasible in a budget, especially for that first novel or that first series, I really encourage people to work with a professional editor, because they can really help push your writing to the next level.
Yeah, that's something that I spent money. I'm not going to say how much, but I spent way more than I thought I was going to because of that fact, because someone suggested a developmental editor to me. And man, he took me through the whole process, and I thought it was really cool. Part of his thing was to educate me so I could, replicate some of it on my own the next time I wrote. And he was catching things and he was dealing with things. And I mean, like, he took 2 or 3 different passes on the manuscript. It wasn't just a simple one time through, give me some notes, kind of stuff. Is that part of what you do? You kind of educate along the way as well? Do you guys do a lot of that as well?
Yes, absolutely. And what I found with some of our clients is that some of our repeat clients, who are coming back to us with their 6th, 7th, 8th book, they end up needing a lot less in the way of developmental editing. Sometimes we can just get away with going straight to a line edit and throwing in a handful of developmental comments as we go, because they've had that practice writing the books, getting the feedback, and figuring out story structure and their own strengths and weaknesses. And so it's something where, I mean, that actually is one of my very favorite things as an editor, is to see how much some of my clients learn and grow along the way, and how much their writing grows through the process. That's definitely a big part of what I love doing.
What are some common mistakes that you find with people as they bring in their first manuscript or their second manuscript, and they think, man, this is awesome? And, of course, you have to give them some, maybe some tough news at times. But what are some of the common mistakes that you see that you have to deal with when you deal with authors and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that I see a fair number of authors who bring me first drafts, which is never a good idea. Sometimes it's because they scheduled a slot months ahead of time and didn't finish the manuscript up as quickly as they'd hoped to. But if you're bringing an editor a first draft, and especially one that wasn't really tightly plotted out beforehand, then the story is usually going to meander in places. And that's usually something. There are a lot of things that an author can fix if they have that extra bit of time to let the manuscript sit a week, go over it a second time, go over it a third time, and fix everything that they can. So yeah, I have authors who send me first drafts. I have authors who don't read in their field sometimes, and so they, like, I had someone send me a manuscript where the setting was really vividly imagined. There was a lot of really lovely stuff there, but he was marketing it, or wanting to market it, as a young adult novel, and the main character was 12. And, a 12-year-old main character, that's definitely a middle grade novel. But then some of the themes were a little too heavy for middle grade. So one of the things that we needed to do as part of that process was bump the character's age up to, 16, 17, somewhere in there, so that the author wouldn't have to compromise the themes of the novel that were very central to what he was doing, and that were the most important thing about the book to him. But we could also fit the genre conventions and meet reader expectations.
Yeah. And that's one of the things too, going back to kind of the critique groups or beta readers and those kind of things. That's something where, just from my experience, you kind of have to be careful about, because I have beta readers, and sometimes they don't want to, sometimes they're not looking for the right things, right? So I'm just connecting this with the need for an editor, because I had beta readers, and sometimes they would give me some helpful kind of ideas, or, oh, that part was slow, or I don't really understand that part. So a lot of that was helpful and helped me to clean it up. But two, my beta readers are my friends, right? These are people who know me, and so they're not going to really dig in and be not brutally honest, but at least be honest enough, that they can deal with some of that stuff. So just to let everybody know, my experience was, critique groups are great, and they can help you with those passes, the first few passes of your novel, but an editor can really, help you take it to the next level, which is what you need.
It is critically important to make sure that, before you publish, or before you pitch to publishers, or whichever way you end up going, that you get some eyes on the manuscript that know the genre, that know the conventions of the genre, and that have an idea of, what the book is going to need to look like in order to perform in the market.
Yeah, and so speaking of kind of the brutal honesty part of it, what are some ways that you like to communicate with authors? Because, obviously they're probably bringing you something that's very personal to them and they're really excited about. So have you found tricks or ways that you like to communicate some of those kind of hard truths with a writer?
Oh, I don't ever want to crush anyone's hopes and dreams. So whenever I edit any manuscript, there's there's a whole lot of things in even really good manuscripts I see. There are a whole lot of things that the author could change to make the book stronger. But there are also a whole lot of things that the author has done well. I've never seen a manuscript that had no strengths. Mm-hmm. And as an editor, I'm mostly being paid to communicate things that need to be changed. So most of any edit, no matter how strong the book is going to focus on areas that could use improvement, areas of weakness. But in every book that I edit, I want to also make sure to communicate to the author what their strengths are. One, because we all need to hear what our strengths are, because editing can feel rough. If you get a developmental edit back and you don't really need some ice cream afterwards, I don't want to say that the editor did it wrong, but there might be a problem if you don't need some ice cream afterwards. Developmental editing those comments are hard to hear. But I always want to make sure that writers are hearing about the things that they did well, so that as they're reading it, they do still feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that there is hope and that they do have strengths as a writer. But I also like to communicate that, because people don't just improve books by working on their areas of weakness. They also improve books by leaning into their areas of strength. And so if I can communicate to an author what their areas of strength are, help develop their confidence in that area of strength, and then, by leaning into those areas of strength, by working even more on those areas sometimes than they do on areas of weakness, they can just improve exponentially and take their book to new heights that way.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Obviously, everyone likes to hear that they're good at stuff, right? And we get more passionate to work on things we think we're good at, right? And so I think that's really important. So let's get more into your writing. So you started the editing, you started the company, getting into it, but part of you were still the little girl with the tiara and the princess dress who wanted to write the novels, right? Write the stories. And so what kind of led you into your first novel? What kind of brought you to that point?
Yeah. So I never gave up on the idea of writing. It was always something that I wanted to do, but it definitely took a back burner to editing for a little while, particularly when editing was the side gig while I was working a day job. Now editing is the day job. And sometime in 2016, I think, I'd attended Realm Makers once. I was sort of getting involved in this sci-fi fantasy world that was out there, and decided to write a book about mermaids. But I was really sort of floundering with the actual writing of it. I think I'd written about 10,000 words and was a little stalled out, and thought that I would maybe finish this someday, but it was a back burner project. It was not something I was particularly serious about taking to market quickly. And then at Realm Makers 2016, I sat down with some other writers and got to talk with Thomas Locke, who was the keynote speaker that year. He also writes under the name Davis Bunn. And he took time with each of us to troubleshoot an area, a problem area in our writing. And my problem area was, I'm just not finishing anything. And Thomas Locke would have been perfectly within his rights to just train me with a death stare and say, you have to finish the book or you're not going to be a writer. But he is a wonderfully sweet man, and what he did instead was he described his own process for writing, and about how he separated out the actual figuring out what happened in a scene with drafting the prose. So he told me, in the evening, do like a sketch of the scene. So write down everything that happens in the scene in basically the order it happens, but don't even remotely worry about writing the scene yet.
Right.
And then the next day in the morning, write the scene. where you've already known what's going to happen exactly, where you've had a chance to let it percolate overnight, and then write the scene, and you'll have better word count days that way. And he was correct. And I finished the rough draft of Breakwater about a month and a half later, and then published it the following May.
So he got you to kind of get over that hump of actually finishing. That's something I had to learn. I think I wrote the first book I've self-published. I think I wrote the first chapter and a half about 5 times. And the second time through, it totally stalled me because I wanted to get the beginning perfect, and it totally stalled me out.
Yes, you cannot get it perfect as you're writing a first draft.
Nope.
First drafts are terrible. They're supposed to be terrible. Let it be terrible.
Exactly.
When aspiring writers want to sit down and have a chat with me about the industry, about the project they're writing, I consistently hear that they haven't finished the project yet. Sometimes they rewrite the first 20,000 words over and over. Sometimes they're stalled out in the middle. But a consistent theme is that they go back and edit.
Yep.
And I've had to tell people, you need to give yourself permission for the first draft to be terrible, for the first draft to have tons of inconsistencies scattered throughout it. But the important thing is getting that first draft done, because then once you've built that momentum, then it's a lot easier to push yourself through the rest of the process.
Yep.
But if you don't build momentum, then you're just going to continue to stall out, and it's not going to happen for you. So yes, I pound that drum. Get the first draft done.
Yeah, and I read a great article about that. I mean, of course, I figured it out on my own, but I read an article later on it that talked about the different sides of your brain kind of thing, where you have your creative side and then you have your editor side, and yes. if you're trying to do both at once, then that's what'll happen. You'll stall out. So you got to kind of vomit the thing out, and then later on go back looking at it more critically.
Yes.
Of course, I had to learn it the hard way. 6 months of the first 2 chapters.
But then you learned that lesson really well because you learned it the hard way.
I learned it well. So now you've got your mermaid kind of series, but this isn't like the Little Mermaid, right? You said it's murder and mayhem. What were the words you used?
Mermaids, murder, and mayhem. So yes, Breakwater and its sequels centers on a 16-year-old girl. Or no, 17. Sorry. The new series I'm writing is a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old mermaid named Jade, who finds out right at the beginning of book 1 that her fiance's murdered someone, and the rest of the series flows out of that incident. As first of all, she's trying to decide, how does one even respond to this? As the repercussions of that murder end up destabilizing the city and the political order, and there's a lot of politics in it. It's there's a coming of age narrative to it, but it's it has a thread of romance, but it's definitely not fundamentally a romance, and it's not particularly inspired by The Little Mermaid. A lot of mermaid books I've been reading recently are essentially retellings of Little Mermaid, and sometimes they're really incredible retellings and really innovative retellings, and I love that the authors are doing that. But that's just not what I did in this particular series.
No, I think it's great. Like I said, I have little sisters, and they love The Little Mermaid, so I've seen it a whole bunch of times.
I rewatched it as I was writing Breakwater, and I loved this book as a child, or movie. I loved this movie as a child. Really loved this movie as a child. But I felt like I felt like there were things in it that I hope will get cleaned up a little bit when they do the live action version of it.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think she could be a lot more active, in my opinion. She could have been a lot more active in the story. I think that would have helped it.
Yes, she also could maybe not literally give up her voice for a man.
Right, exactly.
Literally.
I totally agree. So I'm just saying, I think it's cool to take the mermaids and kind of, because not all the mermaid stories in the olden days were nice, pretty mermaid stories, right?
No, the old mermaid stories are not nice, pretty mermaid stories.
So I think it's a great take on it. I think it's a great kind of not twist, but kind of reimagining, not of the Little Mermaid itself, but just of that kind of whole mythos that you're putting on it. I think it's really cool. So now you have a book coming out soon, right?
Yes. So Maelstrom is the last book in the series that comes out December 4th. And then the series will be complete, which is exciting and sad all at the same time. It's really exciting to get it out, and also I'm going to be glad to write books that are set on land for a little while, because there were only so many synonyms for swim in the English language, and I think I've used all of them.
And wet and water and
Yep.
all those words, and ocean and
Yep.
So what about some of your fans? So, I mean, obviously you've kept this series going. Have you been able to connect with a lot of, is it more of a YA kind of book?
Yes. So it's definitely in that young adult space, which, young adult books are read from, anywhere from 12 to 55, it seems like, or older than that. Yep. Adult women are a really significant part of the readership for Breakwater, but a lot of teenagers too, and those are my favorites to hear from. Is hearing from a girl who's 12, 14, 15, somewhere in there, and really enjoyed the book. That always makes me happier than anything else with it.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorite? I know you talked about how it affected them, but what are some of your favorite interactions with some of the fans about what they love about it and how they connected with the story?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think hearing from girls who, something about the character really touched them, or, when I hear that it kept a teenage girl up late into the night turning pages and that sort of thing, that's always just really fun.
So you've got this book coming out, Maelstrom, right? Am I getting it right? Yeah. And that's coming out in December, which will be right around the time this episode is coming out. But I know you've also signed a deal for a new series. Is that correct?
So there's a couple other projects that I'm working on right now. One of them is a historical fantasy, and that's not one that is signed for at this point. I'm still in the drafting process for it. But that is one that my agent is going to be pitching to publishers. So we're going to see about maybe going that route. And then there is another series that I'm in the outlining process for that I'm planning to take independent, like how I published Breakwater. And that one is centered around a fire dancer, and I'm really excited about it.
Cool. Have you looked up all the terms and the thesaurus and everything for fire? Have you done that yet?
There are also a limited number of words for fire, but I think it's going to be okay because there are an almost unlimited number of words for walk. Unlike swim.
Yes, that's part of my editing process too. And because I do a lot of action, not sword and sorcery, but some of that, fighting and swords, and there's only so many ways you can do stab and kick, and you have to be really creative in how you kind of do it differently each time, because if you just kind of do it the same each time, it's kind of boring to me, at least.
And getting repetitive.
Yeah. So where can people find you? So let's start with the editing company. What's your website for that?
Yes. So if you want to chat with us about editing, you can find us at quillpeneditorial.com. There's a contact form on that page that goes straight to our managing editor, and she'll match you with the best editors for what you need. And if you need help figuring out what you need, we can talk with you about that as well.
Right. And what about your own personal stuff? Is that you've got a website for your personal books?
Yes. So I have a website. It's just CatherineJonesPayne.com. I'm not super active on there, but it has links to my books, that sort of thing. I am a lot more active on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So my Facebook author page is Catherine Jones Payne Author is the handle for that. My Twitter is C Jones Payne. Because Twitter didn't have enough characters to let me have my name. And Instagram is Catherine Jones Payne. So they are all different. I apologize. But that is just the way it worked out with signing up for each of them.
That's awesome. Well, Catherine, I really appreciate this. I think editing is something that, like we've already talked about, a lot of people need. And obviously some authors are probably afraid of at some point. And I think it's a good conversation to have about the need for one, and the fact that even though you are an editor, you get it yourself, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I need ice cream at the end of a developmental edit. It's okay. It's part of the process. It's a rite of passage.
It is. So I really appreciate this time, Catherine, and I appreciate your input on this, especially this topic, and I'm looking forward to seeing how well Maelstrom does. I think you've been doing a good job, kind of keeping everybody in the loop on social media. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for having me.
No problem. Well, so we'll talk to you soon.
All right.